Hi, Adrian Davis here on the Armor of God for the web. And are you asking yourself, what's happening to our society? Doesn't it seem to you like it's unraveling? We have insane people free to walk the streets and gun down our children. We have no respect for our borders. People are just welcome to come into our countries, changing our demographics. Those who have any form of patriotism are cast as evil and wicked. There's no respect for authority. There's no respect for our history. Our monuments are being torn down. What is going on? That's the question that I want to answer today. I want to help us to understand why is our world changing the way that it is? What's behind all of this? And would you believe it? The answer lies with the fictional character Humpty Dumpty. That's right, Humpty Dumpty of the nursery rhyme. He gives us some incredible insight into why our world is changing the way that it's changing. You know, the author of Alice in Wonderland wrote another book called The Looking Glass, or Through the Looking Glass, which precedes Alice in Wonderland. And Alice enters this fictional world by stepping through this looking glass. And she has a conversation with Humpty Dumpty, which when I read this, I just about jumped out of my seat because it just perfectly explains what's going on in our world today. In this dialogue, Alice starts by complimenting Humpty Dumpty on the belt that he's wearing. And he explains that it was a gift given to him by the king on his unbirthday. And Alice is wondering what an unbirthday is and what an unbirthday present is, and says she prefers birthday presents, for which Humpty Dumpty corrects her and shows her how foolish she is. But let me share with you this dialogue. And so he gets her to calculate how many unbirthdays there are in a year, and there's 364. And he says, and only one for birthday presents, you know. There's glory for you. I don't know what you mean by glory, Alice said. Humpty Dumpty smiled contemptuously and said, of course you don't, until I tell you. He says, there's a nice knockdown argument for you. And she says, but glory doesn't mean a nice knockdown argument, Alice objected. When I use a word, said Humpty Dumpty in a rather scornful tone, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less. The question is, said Alice, whether you can make words mean so many different things. The question is, said Humpty Dumpty, which is to be master? That's all. That's the insight. That's what I read that I nearly jumped out of my seat. This is about who is to be master. And we are living in a world that's described as a postmodern world where the definition of words are being changed. That good is evil and evil is good. This is all postmodernism, and we need to understand what this is. You know, Humpty Dumpty really represents the elite. He was sitting up on a wall. Alice had to look up to him. He's a symbol of the elite of society. And Alice symbolizes us, the common people. And we're just wondering, can they make these words mean whatever they choose them to mean? Postmodernism is a term describing one of three eras that our society has come through. So our world has gone through three eras, the first being the pre-modern era, then the modern era, and now the postmodern era. The pre-modern era was characterized by a belief in the supernatural. So reality was defined by the supernatural. The modern era was defined by logic and reason and a search for understanding through evidence, empirical evidence. Now our world today, the postmodern world, is defines reality by saying there's no such thing as reality. That all of reality is socially constructed. It's basically we agree on what reality is, and it can be changed at any time. That's what's meant by the postmodern world. Now, the modern world gave us an appreciation for logic. And all of our courses, sociology, biology, psychology, anthropology, there was this underlying premise and understanding that there's a logic, there's a reason why, there's a logic behind things. The reason postmodernists are throwing logic away is at heart, they are Marxists, and they want to advance a Marxist agenda. But Marxism has lost all credibility. That Marxism has proven, if we're going to look at evidence, there is no evidence to show the truth of Marxism. In fact, the opposite is shown. That those capitalist nations that Karl Marx said would lead to suffering and would lead to the poor would get poorer and the rich would get richer. In fact, evidence has shown the opposite. That while the rich may get richer, the poor get richer as well. And in all the capitalist countries, their citizens are treated far better than socialist countries. That citizens suffer at the hands of their government of socialist countries. And in fact, the poor get poorer in socialist countries, and the rich get richer. And so there's no empirical evidence to support Marxism. And this is why there's now this pivot and this shift to postmodernism. Postmodernism says, okay, there's no evidence, okay, there's no logic to support our position, but logic and evidence, these are power plays. And we're against the oppressor. And so don't use logic and evidence because that's just a form of oppression. We're throwing that out and we're deconstructing reality. And the two philosophers that are driving this postmodernist agenda, they're dead now, but they're recent philosophers. They really came to their height and their epitome in the 70s. One is Jacques Derrida, and the other is Michel Foucault. And what Jacques Derrida brought us was this focus on language and what he called the deconstruction of text, and basically saying that we must not care about the author's intent behind a text, that all that matters is what the reader thinks, and the reader is free to interpret the text any way he wants or she wants. And so the key is what he called deconstruction. Don't accept the authority of the author. Michel Foucault, his contribution to postmodernism was to say whatever people believe today, we need to look at it historically and show that at one time the opposite was believed, and that over time the current set of beliefs were evolved over time, and therefore they're not really true. And therefore reality is something that is socially constructed. And these two philosophers are what are driving society in the West today. And their emphasis and their intention, their agenda, is to deconstruct Western civilization. That basically no value system is better than any other. No civilization is better than any other. But Western civilization is evil. And Western Judeo-Christian values are terrible. And they're the worst of all. And so there's this hypocrisy behind postmodernism. And most certainly, my friends, there's an agenda. They have no criticism of non-Western civilizations. It's all about deconstructing Western civilization. And it's really amazing. You know, Proverbs 22 verse 28 says, "Remove not the old landmark which your fathers have set." And that's what we have to do. We have to hold on to time-proven principles, principles that don't change over time. In Colossians 2 and verse 8, the Apostle Paul says, "Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men and the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ." The Apostle Paul understood the power of philosophy. A lot of us think that philosophy is, it's a course you take in school. And we don't understand what Paul understood, that philosophy drives everything. Philosophy is our outlook, it's our perspective. And when people in society all agree on a particular perspective, that's what drives the agenda, that's what drives the value system of that society. And our media, our entertainment, our politicians, all walks of life have bought into postmodernism, because that's what's being taught in our higher institutions of learning. And as people graduate from these institutions, they take this postmodernist philosophy into whatever careers they pursue. And so we're just seeing our society, Western society, being redefined, being deconstructed. In Isaiah 5, the prophet Isaiah says in verse 20, "Woe unto them that call evil good." And that's what the postmodernists are doing. They're taking what is evil and they're saying it's good. And they're taking what is good and they're saying it's evil. The prophet Isaiah says, "Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, and put darkness for light and light for darkness, and put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. You know, this is exactly what George Orwell warned us about in 1984. On his deathbed, he's being interviewed why he wrote 1984. And it was to warn us that a totalitarian regime is coming, that people have infiltrated our governments in order to introduce totalitarianism. And that is the ultimate aim of postmodernists. Let's deconstruct so that we can reconstruct. But who will reconstruct? Oh, I get it. Humpty Dumpty will. Humpty Dumpty will redefine everything. And so the question is, can we trust Humpty Dumpty as our master? Well, we mustn't fall for Humpty Dumpty's tricks. In fact, all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again once he had his great fall. And Humpty Dumpty, these great philosophers, are going to have a great fall. And in fact, the kings themselves are going to have a great fall. And that's shown in Revelation chapter 6, verse 15, where the Apostle John writes that the kings of the earth and the great men and the rich men and the chief captains and the mighty men and every bondman and every free man hid themselves in the dens and the rocks. They were fleeing the wrath of Jesus Christ because they implemented a totalitarian system. And that's what postmodernism is leading to, my friends. It is leading to the prophecies in the book of Revelation that say that a beast power, a political power, is going to come and introduce a totalitarian system, which George Orwell tried to warn us about, with Isaiah prophesied about, Jeremiah prophesied about, all the prophets warned us. And that's very clear in the book of Revelation, what's coming. And so we need to be very, very clear of what's happening. And look, time's run out on me here, but I want to offer you some information that will go into far more detail. It's a sermon that I gave recently on this very topic of postmodernism. It's a 1-hour sermon, so I have a lot more time to develop the concepts. And it's called, Hey, Who Moved My Cheese? That's right, Hey, Who Moved My Cheese? So just write to us, info@cgi.org, and request this 1-hour length sermon, Hey, Who Moved My Cheese? It's about postmodernism, the danger of postmodernism, and what we can do to successfully navigate our reality and how it's being redefined. Well, this is Adrian Davis. Thanks again for joining us on this Armor of God on the Web.